Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive socioeconomic shift in post-communist Romania. But, instead of just throwing dry data at you, we're going to look at the true human cost of global labor shifts through the deeply personal lens of one extended family. If you've ever thought about remote work, brain drain, or leaving your hometown for better opportunities, well, this is the extreme reality of those choices. Let's dive in.
So think about this for a second. What actually happens to a town when half its residents just up and leave? This exact scenario played out in the small Romanian town of Bicas. Right after the fall of communism in 1989, an economic crisis basically gripped the entire nation. And Bicas, which was once this really important industrial hub, faced a staggering reality. Almost half the town just packed their bags and left. Today, Bicas is kind of a shadow of its former industrial self. The population is hovering right around just 6,500 people. It's tucked away in the historical region of Moldavia, about 400 kilometers north of Bucharest. But honestly, the total headcount, that only tells half the story.
Just look at this demographic skew. According to recent census data, people aged 60 to 70 actually make up the largest group in the entire region. I mean, imagine your own hometown, but an entire generation of youth has just vanished to find work, leaving mostly parents and grandparents behind to fend for themselves.
All right, part one, the shrinking town of Bacchus. To really get what the reality on the ground feels like today, we have to meet Antonella Andonescu, though locally, absolutely everyone just calls her Koka. She's a local woman who actually joined that massive exodus, survived the struggles abroad, and then ultimately made the extremely rare decision to return home. Now, Koka runs a private nursing home right in Bicas. Since government-run facilities are incredibly rare, her home is an absolute lifeline, caring for 80 elderly residents. And she doesn't just offer affordable care, she is laser-focused on real human connection. They're playing rummy and dominoes every single day. She even bought a 12-person motorboat to take the residents out on therapeutic trips on the local reservoir, Lake Bicas. Plus, she's employed her older sister, Adriana, which keeps the whole facility a true family operation.
Which brings us to part two, the post-communist exodus.
To understand why Koka's nursing home is literally at maximum capacity, we need to trace how this town's history builds and what exactly triggered this massive demographic collapse. See, Bicas grew entirely around industry. Back in 1950, a hydroelectric dam created that massive local reservoir. By the late 70s, the Bicas cement plant was absolutely booming. But man, it was brutal, toxic work. Workers recall inhaling mouthfuls of asbestos dust, and the surrounding birchwoods were literally stained stark white with lime. Then 1989 hit. The fall of communism triggered mass privatizations and immediate factory closures. That sudden, desperate unemployment crisis forced a frantic scramble out of the country just to survive.
And the sheer scale of this exodus is mind-blowing. We are talking about a massive Romanian diaspora totaling approximately 6 million people worldwide. Entire neighborhoods in Romania emptied out almost overnight. Young adults were just heading west to find absolutely any work they could get their hands on.
So, where did they end up? Part three, surviving the Italian diaspora. Leaving was really only the very first hurdle. Italy quickly became a primary destination because the language had familiar roots, and honestly, the demand for manual labor was just extremely high. Look at this distribution. The Rome suburb of Ostia alone absorbed 250,000 Romanians. Let that sink in for a second. An entire city's worth of people transplanted into a single Italian neighborhood. It became this incredibly concentrated hotspot for migrants desperately searching for a fresh start, relying entirely on word-of-mouth networks just to find a foothold.
But you have to remember, in the late 90s, Romania wasn't part of the European Union yet. So immigration was this underground, totally grueling ordeal. These early migrants faced intense struggles. They had to hide from the local Italian police, the Carabinieri, sometimes locked inside a house for weeks on end. If they got evicted, they'd live at train stations, literally washing up in tiny public sinks. They arrived with absolutely nothing but pocket notebooks full of strangers' phone numbers, just crossing their fingers that someone would pick up and help them. Sometimes survival meant packing 12 people into a single cramped RV for weeks on end. No privacy, no space, just survival.
I mean, check out this vivid quote from a migrant named Florine. It perfectly captures the stark poverty, but also the sheer resourcefulness of those early days. While living 12 to an RV, they couldn't afford a stove, obviously, so they survived on chicken cooked over a wheelbarrow. Talk about making do with what you have. They built their new lives in Italy quite literally from the trash, starting from the absolute ground up. And all of that hardship leads us right into part 4, the generational divide. This intense trauma of relocation ultimately created a massive, profound psychological rift between the old and the young. We can see this tension perfectly juxtaposed right here between Koka and her niece, Andra. Koka represents the first generation. She worked her absolute heart out in Turkey and Italy, sent all her money back, and constantly thought of returning. As she says, her soul stayed in Romania. But then you have Andra, who was brought to Italy as a young teen. She integrated super easily. She learned Italian from cartoons, built a solid career in the restaurant industry, and started her own family. For Andra, Romania is a nice place for a month-long summer vacation, but it is definitely no longer home. Looking at these perspectives laid out like this, you really see the heartbreaking reality of the diaspora. The older, first-generation views Italy purely as a place of struggle and labor. Their constant refrain is just one more year, and then we'll go back. But they get trapped by that steady income. Meanwhile, the second generation has firmly planted their roots in Italian culture. They don't carry that same nostalgia. For them, Italy is home, and they are planning to stay forever.
But there is some hope here. Part 5, Rebuilding and Reconnecting.
So, despite this seemingly permanent fracture between the generations and the geography, there are still these powerful forces pulling some people back. Koka actually defied the statistical trend completely. In 2003, she did what everyone else was only talking about doing. She finally went home. Having spent a decade learning geriatric nursing in Italy, she brought those valuable skills directly back to Bicas. She convinced her sisters to return with her to care for their own aging father, Andonescu, and she essentially began single-handedly rebuilding a sense of community for the town's forgotten elders. And honestly, she's not stopping anytime soon. She's already planning to open a second facility.
And you know, whether they are back in Rome or Romania, there is one endearing tradition that keeps absolutely everyone connected: the barbecue. Grilling traditional mici, which are these delicious, skinless sausages, is totally essential. You'll find it happening in the courtyard of Koka's nursing home in Bicas, and simultaneously right in the backyard of a Romanian plumber out in Ostia, Italy. No matter how far you move, you just can't escape the family barbecue. It is the ultimate comfort, that true taste of home that bridges that massive geographic divide. I think Koka's dedication to the parents left behind by an entire migrated generation is summarized beautifully in this simple, profound philosophy. She says, "If you do what you love, you never get tired." The daily grind of rebuilding a community, of caring for those whose children are thousands of miles away, it's got to be exhausting. But for her, the emotional reward of finally being home makes it entirely sustainable.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. We tend to talk a lot about global economics and labor mobility as these big abstract concepts, but the story of Bakash shows us the deeply personal aftermath. When an entire generation is forced to leave just to build a future, someone has to step up and care for the past they leave behind. Think about Koka's choice and what it really means for the resilience of our own communities. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.